Welcome everyone to the third event on today's Newburyport Literary Festival. This is our virtual day, as you can tell. I'm Leslie Hendrickson. I'm on the steering committee of the festival, as is our moderator today, Molli Wentworth. I'm going to thank our sponsors, the Newburyport Bank, the Institutions for Savings, and the Mass Cultural Council. And we really appreciate all of their help. Now I will hand it over to Molli Wentworth. Thank you, Molli, and thank you, Greta.
Thanks, Leslie. I just spent the weekend with Leslie in Newburyport for the in-person festival events. And I came back to Maine late last night, so I'm thrilled to be home, and I'm thrilled to be here with Greta Rybus, who's a well-known photojournalist, who we invited to discuss with us her new book, Hot Springs. Welcome, Greta. Where are you joining us from today?
I'm in my little cozy living room in Portland, Maine. I have like a quilt and a tea, and I hope that you all have cozy things where you're at as well.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I would love to dig in a little bit into your background before we jump into Hot Springs. So I think for people who are joining us who may not be familiar with your work, would you tell us a little bit about what led you to photojournalism?
Sure. I wanted to take pictures as early as I can remember. I was asking for a camera pretty early on as a kid. I was raised as an only child with parents that were school teachers, and we went on a lot of road trips and a lot of different trips in which it was just kind of me in the back seat with my imagination, and I would imagine the pictures that I would take out the car window. And so I knew I wanted to study photojournalism in school, and I also studied cultural anthropology. So I studied both of those things at the University of Montana, and I sort of smushed those two things together. And typically I like photographing. This is so cool, by the way. I can see where people are popping in.
I know.
I love that there's some other West Coasters. I'm originally from Idaho. And anyways, I studied those two practices, and I prefer to do stories about people and the natural world and that are in more reciprocal relationships, so that there's stories of stewardship, lots of homesteaders, farmers, and fishermen here in Maine.
Amazing. And you kind of led me to my next question, which was what brought you to Maine? Because I know you're from the West Coast. And so what brought you here? When did you arrive here? And how do you like it?
My parents were, like I said, were teachers, and they taught overseas. And so I was used to bouncing around quite a bit. And we had lived in several different places and traveled in several different places, but I had never been to New England really in my life. And so I had kind of no romanticism about New England. I didn't have a ton of context for it. And I just happened to graduate with a degree in photojournalism during the 2008 recession. So I just was working my minimum wage job for a year, knowing I needed to get out of Montana, and applied to as many positions as I could with the word photo in it. In hindsight, I applied to some silly positions that I was not qualified for. But I got one call back, and it was an internship here in Portland as a photo editing internship. So honestly, a lot of pretty like putting metadata into submitted photos. And I sold everything. I sold my car and I moved out here. And by the time the internship was done, I had my first couple freelance gigs. And I think the first one paid $40, and I had to Google what an invoice was to
Oh
do
my
it.
God.
But I just kind of slowly started being able to build a bit of a career with freelance, and I'm still kind of piecing it together as I go, but it is so fun to work here in Maine. It's a really, really special thing.
I
So,
love that. That's amazing. And then I think my next question before, we get into the book is, what led you to the topic of hot springs, and why did you decide that hot springs and this topic and this journey that you took was so important that you wanted it to be put in a book rather than just a news article?
well, there's a lot of answers to that question, to be honest.
We want them
Um,
all.
I I had been hired to photograph a book. and a different writer wrote the book. And I was still pretty early on in my career, but the publisher of that book just said, hey, you know, we like to see our contributors pitch a book. And I hadn't really thought about it, like pitch a second book. I hadn't really thought about it that much until that point, but the second he asked that question, this idea of hot springs came into my mind, because I had grown up going to hot springs. And then whenever I traveled, I sought out hot springs. And the nice thing about being in a thermal pool or a public bath is you just sit either by yourself or with people. And a lot of times when you're with people, you're just chit-chatting and you're learning about the story of a place or what that hot spring means to them. And a lot of hot springs had really impacted my life, as a kid, as a young adult. And so I had already been kind of taking mental notes about the story, the hot springs stories, and I felt like there was something there. And then when I sat down and started researching, like some of these hot springs locations had such interesting history and stories, I just knew there was a lot that could go into a book, more than I could fit into an article.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because, here, if you're born and raised in Maine, hot springs are typically something that you know about or go to. And I think if I hadn't moved to the West Coast for a while, I would have never really understood this topic and how it really is a place for community and also a spectacular involvement of nature. And so, it's really outstanding. And I think for those who haven't got a copy of this gorgeous book yet, I'm hoping that, Greta, you can share a few slides, a few images of what is inside the book before we can dig into the travels that you took and the people that you met.
Yeah, should I pull that up now?
Yes, please.
Let's do it. Okay. Hold on. Can you all see that?
Yep, I think if you can just go into perfect.
All right. This is the book. We have some wiggly tile from a traditional onsen in Japan, hot bath in Japan, as the cover. I worked with a really amazing designer named Lizzie Allen, who did the design of the full book. And we just like got into this fun fugue state designing things together. It was so fun to work with her and to pair images. So these are some of my favorite pairings and my favorite places. This is in Mexico, a hot springs that's run collaboratively by a local community. This is one of my favorite hot spring locations in Budapest. I cried when I walked into this location.
Doesn't look real.
It doesn't look real. It doesn't even feel real when you're there because the way the sound moves and the way the light moves is super, super special. And it's also really, really hot water. Like it's the kind of water that you are going to emerge from feeling bright red and completely renewed. And that's also by design because in Hungary, a lot of times doctors prescribe therapeutic hot spring soaks or treatments to help people with different ailments. So of course I dove into that for that chapter. I forgot that there might be a little nudity in this slideshow. We see some
Love
bum,
to see it.
but that's the human body, baby. We get to enjoy our body in hot springs in different ways. We get to feel the way heat moves through our body. We get to experience what it's like to be with people of all different ages and sizes. And that's something that I heard a lot from people at the hot springs that I visited, that especially people that grow up with hot springs as a part of their daily routine or their weekly rituals, that being in proximity with other people in either nude or semi-nude was actually really helpful to understand what bodies might look like during different life phases, and bodies of all different sizes and shapes and genders and scars, bumps and bruises, dimples. It's all part of what it's like to be a person. And I think that people that live in proximity with hot springs have a very special perspective of the body because of that. This is a hot spring that I grew up going to, called Bergdorf in Idaho. My parents went on their honeymoon there. So I kind of put a little dash of memoir or autobiography into this book, but just a little sprinkling. I wanted to include workers in the book. So on the left, you'll see Henry, who operates Rimbasmak hot spring in South Africa. And he and his community members were forced off of their land, forcibly evicted off of their land in, I believe, the 70s. I'll have to read my own book to remember the exact date. And then the land was returned to them through one of the first examples of land reparations in South Africa, and now they're the stewards of the land. So people that run and operate hot springs were super important to include. And then the man on the right was simply repairing some roads and making some hot spring locations more accessible in Turkey. So as a person, I think there's the most to learn from locals and workers, so they were super, super important to include in this book. Hot springs around the world are a source of spirituality. This is a hot spring in India on the banks of the Parvati River. On the left side, you can see a Sikh temple that's right next to a Hindu temple, and they've coexisted there for a very, very, very long time, and they share an origin story. And one of the things that I found really interesting about the Gurdwara, which is the Sikh temple, is that everything there is free and open to the public. So that means food, lodging, and it's all volunteer run. So it's this big active service to be able to experience lodging and hot springs for all. This is also in Turkey. This is what I feel like when I'm in a hot spring. It's like this pure restorative feeling. And it's one of the bigger lessons that I think we can have from the hot spring experience, is just to be sort of like held and supported by nature in a way that feels very simple and straightforward. A lot of the relationships with nature that I document involve a lot of hard work by the humans involved. So farming and fishing, there's a lot of work, and homesteading, there's a lot of work involved. With hot springs, there's a little bit of work involved. There's usually someone behind the scenes that is mixing water or cleaning things. And so I wanted to make sure they were represented. But for most of the people that interact with a hot spring, it's a pretty purely restorative and relaxing experience. And that's also something to celebrate. I wanted to include all thermal water in this book, but I cheated a little bit with one chapter, and that is the Sento chapter in Tokyo. So this is a location in which municipal water is heated. Actually, I photographed dozens of these locations around Tokyo. Dozens. Okay, I photographed many. I don't remember the exact number, but I photographed many of these locations. And the reason why I made an exception for this chapter is because of how important these are for community members. A lot of the older homes in Tokyo don't have municipal or don't have showers or bathtubs in their homes. So the community baths play an important role. And then even for people that might have those facilities in their house, they still prefer to go to the community bath because it's a place where you gossip and you chat and you hang out with your neighbors or your family or your friends. It's a really important example of a third space, so a space that's not home or work. And a lot of these, a lot of the Sento in Tokyo are being closed down because their real estate is worth more than they are able to bring in. So they're closing really rapidly, and there are some young people stepping up to try to save them. But I think they're important cultural icons worthy of protection. I included a few natural hot springs in the book, but not that many. And by natural, I mean a place that you just drive up to and they're just right there, or you hike into and they're just right there. There's not someone selling a ticket. The reason why the majority of the hot springs in the book have a caretaker or someone selling a ticket is because I didn't know how successful this book would be. I didn't know if there would be an increase in the amount of visitors that would go to a place. So while I tried to make sure that the locations I included were accessible, meaning of a variety of price points, a variety of like distances, like how far you had to travel to get somewhere. I also wanted to make sure that there was someone there that was protecting each hot spring. So the few wild ones that I included, I didn't include their names or their directions on how to get to. They were really, the wild hot springs were very important in my upbringing. Those are the ones that I loved going to the most. But I thought a lot about each place that I included and whether I felt like they would be able to be healthy and stable after I visited and published this book. I included this picture simply because of the adventure that it took to get to each of these locations. In the book, there's 13 countries and 23 chapters. And in some of the chapters, there are up to a dozen hot springs represented. So this was just a big, grand adventure that I got to go on to make this book. And for most people that are also hot springs nerds and enthusiasts, they often will do all sorts of things, just like me, to try and visit a far-flung hot spring. So I'm in good company with people that will drive for hours and hours or hike for hours and hours. This is Bergdorf again. Super, super, super special to be able to experience temperature contrasts. So to be in hot water and to feel cold, I think that a lot of times human beings seek temperature contrasts just to feel alive. So that's why we have the popularity of cold plunging and sauna and hot springs. I think they're all kind of like siblings or cousins because it makes you feel alive. Again, you can feel the blood in your body, you can feel sweat, you can feel steam. And in the beginning of the book, I write a couple things about how to care for your body as you experience those contrasts and make sure that you have to be pretty tapped into yourself to know that you're not overdoing it and that you're enjoying each hot spring safely. This is in Greenland. This is Inartok Hot Springs. I believe Sarah, who helped me, who was like a huge support and has been a huge support, for me to visit Greenland, might be with us today. So hi, Sarah. I hope that you're here. This is a hot spring on an island, and it's an actual archaeological ruin. People made this, I think, 1,000 years ago. Again, I'd have to check the book, but it's a super special thing to think about many different generations. And by generations, I mean like Inuit people, Norse people, possibly bathing side by side on this island, people that likely didn't experience warmth ever, like unless it was maybe by a fire, but there's also not a lot of firewood. So it's a super special thing to think about what it would have felt like historically to be able to warm your body in such an immersive way during a time in which that was probably very rare. And that's it. Now we get to chat more.
Thank you. I love that. I think, and thank you, Sarah, for joining us from Greenland. That's so amazing. Well, you touched on the 13 countries that you went to, that you captured within this book. How much time did you spend planning, traveling, photographing, and putting together after this book, do you think that you spent? Because this book it's immense. You went so many places. You featured not just photos, but in this book, you talk about the people that you met. You talk about religions that go into, using hot springs as a way of kind of cleansing and a spiritual awakening. And how much time do you think you put into this?
So I started researching the book in 2017. So it's been 7 years until I had the idea and when it came out. I started really pitching the book in 2019. I did I did a year of researching, a year of formulating the pitch, a year of pitching. Took me some time because I was doing all that work around my regular assignments. And then I don't actually talk about this that much because I don't want it to change the way the book is perceived. But I signed the contract for the book in February 2020, and we all know what happened in 2020. So it was on pause for a long time. And then I started slowly traveling again. My first trip, I drove across the country because I was afraid to fly.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, we were all, how to explore the world again
Yeah.
safely. So my goal was to make this book without putting anyone else at risk, or putting myself at risk. And I was able to photograph the whole thing without ever getting sick. So that was a huge success. I did a lot of this. Most of this book was photographed in a mask, or a lot of it was outdoors. I did a lot of COVID testing. And then I finished the book in, I think the end of 2022. So there was about a year and a half where I was gone like a week of every month. And then I would come back and write and edit and photograph other assignments because I still had to work on other projects. And so I hope that my sharing of that doesn't change the way people look at the book. I hope
Oh,
people enjoy it as like a timeless thing, because these
of
hot
course.
springs will continue to exist. And but it was an added challenge. And I spent a lot of time kind of like a little nervous and thinking about the ethics. And there were many trips that got canceled or postponed.
And it also factors into the people you met and, the cultures that you traveled through, and especially in this time of COVID, post COVID, where it's a little harder to meet strangers and to travel to new countries. I think my original question was, how was it interacting with different cultures and people in the hot springs, especially now after we've all been through such a crazy time?
I I think I have traveled for photography for a long time. And so a few times I traveled with friends, and I would like look at them and realize that they weren't necessarily used to some of the things that I'm kind of used to in terms of traveling. And
Yeah.
just so sometimes it's hard for me to answer that question, because I feel like this is like, I don't know, it'd be a norm for me to do things that aren't super typical for other folks. But I just felt like the one common thing was that people were really, really kind to me everywhere that I went. And I was really welcomed. And hot springs are one of those things that are everybody's like favorite local treasure. And so I expected a lot of people to be super protective. And they're very protective of the things that they love. But I also felt like there was so much excitement. Like, look at this beautiful thing that we have on this planet. So I always felt really welcomed. And I felt like the people that I met always just sort of like shared in my wonder of each place. A lot of local people had a lot of pride for this,
Yeah.
both their local story or the natural phenomena is there. So it was like a very healing and restorative thing for me just to make this book,
That's,
um
that's
yeah.
so lovely. And I think I'm like not just the culture and the people, but I mean, the different ecosystems that you saw, and the fact that you're saying that in Tokyo they're starting to close a lot of these places, which were gathering places, hygienic places, and in the natural world, we're dealing with so many changes in the environment, and we're dealing with it's like going on camping trails, and some people leave trash behind, and I know that that's an issue with natural hot springs and why it's best not to share the location, but I guess my question is from one ecosystem to the next, like what is something that you're noticing, and what are worries for the future of hot springs, both natural and made?
Yeah. Well, Um, I think that there is this idea that hot springs are not affected by climate change, and there are. I mean, one hot spring that I was interested in including, I couldn't include because it burnt down. And then there were also some by a climate caused wildfire, to be clear. And I included this in the book, but there is a hot spring in India called Kirganga. And it is a very, very popular place, too popular. And there's such a thing as a place becoming too popular. And so we had planned to trek into Kirganga to visit it. And it's easily Googleable. You can see lots of pictures of it online. It's beautiful. It's like tucked onto this mountainside, partially like at the base of a temple. And it's operated by like local temple priests. And they did a ceremony similar to one that I documented and included in the book. And during that ceremony, they felt like they heard a message from their local deities, the local gods, that said, too many people have come here. Too many people have come here and disrespected the land. And it's true. You can see that there's litter, there's rubbish, there's a lot of erosion. And the second that they got that message, they walked up to the hot springs, turned all the taps off, and drained it. And it's no longer open to the public. And
Wow.
they have no plans to open it to the public. And I actually really respect that decision, and I respect the clarity of the decision. And it's a response to visitors not caring for the space. Like, it became a party space.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very likely that we may see that more at hot springs. And there have been some news stories, even since I published the book, about local officials not really knowing what to do at hot springs where people have been reckless. So I think that while a lot of the hot springs that I included in the book seem really well cared for and taken care of, there are questions about how to manage this resource so that it can be safe and enjoyable for everyone, and then also so that the natural ecosystem is respected. And so we're at a bit of a crossroads for a lot of hot springs around the world, and it's a similar crossroads that we find ourselves at with lots and lots of other things in the natural world. And so what I looked for in this book was looking for the helpers, the people that are wanting to help the natural ecosystems, and likely also help the people that want to visit these places too.
Yeah, and preserve the spaces if possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's just such a fascinating book, and I really applaud you for working so hard and long and enjoying the travels while making it. And it's been a delight, I think, in Midcoast Maine to see it start popping up at all these shops. I'm just like, this is so exciting. And I know that one of our book sponsors for the festival, Bookshop of Beverly Farms, is going to start carrying your book. And I think, my question as a little bit of a book nerd is, what's next? Do you think, I know you have a full career as a photojournalist, you're writing everywhere, but do you think you'd ever write another book?
Yeah, I have an idea for a second book. And typically I research in the winter. And I didn't have time this winter because I had other things going on, including just sharing this book. It takes a little bit of time to like let everyone know you've got a book coming out and post about it and stuff like that. So the second book might not happen for a bit, but I've I have already have so many pages of notes and things that I'm researching. And so perhaps next winter I'll start actively putting that proposal together. But
That's
yeah,
so exciting.
I'm hooked on books now.
Okay, good. That's so exciting to hear. I have one more question before we open it up to questions. And Kathy, thank you for already putting a question in the chat. Where can people find you? I know you're on Instagram. Tell us, where you're updating the most, or where to follow along with what you're up to.
I'm on Instagram. I'm trying to be better about posting on Instagram. Like, I have maybe 3 or 4 stories that have come out in the last few weeks that I just haven't put on Instagram. So I'm a little guilty of like posting 3 months after a story came out, but I do post a lot on Instagram. And I have a website. It's just my name. And I've added a print section to my website, which is kind of fun. I'm trying to be better about sharing that. I work with a really cool small business printer in the South. And then I'm trying to get some signed copies out there of the book. So Rediscovered Books in Boise, Idaho, my hometown, has some copies. I think Print and Washington Baths here in Maine has some. I think you can order online at some of those places. And then I'm trying to think of where else you can also order the book from any bookstore that you love. They should be able to get it for you, even if they don't have it in stock. And if you like the book, leave a review. And I say that
Where do
only
you want the review?
wherever, or tell a friend, just because it has brought me so much joy just to see kind reviews. And so that's like a total shameless plug. To be like, leave a review. It makes me happy.
I love that. I also a shameless plug is that I enjoyed, you used to post like just a series of like happy videos
Oh
on
yeah,
your story. Oh,
all right.
and I was
Formal request to do it.
I was hooked
All
on
right.
watching the stories that you would post. It was just you shared the most wholesome things from around the world, and I'm urging you to do that again. So
I'll do another batch.
good. So
Very
follow
well.
Greta Rybus on Instagram, check out her website, buy her book, and now we can ask her questions. And I see that Kathy has asked if you have any local New England hot springs you recommend, and where do you go? And also, follow-up question, which is a really good one, is what is the difference between hot springs and hot tubs? Two questions.
Okay, so we don't have natural geothermal water here in New England. But I think that New England has realized that Mainers want a little bit of comfort too. So there is we have Washington Baths here in Portland that I love so much. It's a super special sauna and bathing experience. Um, right now, I think most of their bathing times are silent. So if you go, I kind of recommend going by yourself. So you get to have a very nice introspective time. If you want to go do something with a bunch of buddies, I really recommend visiting saunas because, like I said, they're the cousin of hot springs, and that's what we've got here. We've got some saunas. So we have, I think, Nurtured Through Nature in Denmark, Maine. And then Jackie at Cedar Grove Sauna is super awesome. She is doing a huge like redo of the saunas this summer. So they'll be back open in the fall. And then you can also do cold plunge, which is like maybe the more estranged cousin.
I've been to her pop up a few times when she does it at, for those that are local New
Yeah.
England.
Mhm.
She not only has like a home base for her saunas, but she has been branching out and bringing them to different locations on the coast of Maine. And you know, there's like an oyster farm, Glidden Point, that hosts them. And they even secured a cold bath just for the people aside from the oysters, and it's a pretty special experience.
I think the pop-ups, I'm glad you said that because I think the pop-up locations will continue. Okay, so a hot spring, I actually realized while I was working on this book, I would just be, going out and doing my normal assignments and hanging out with people here in New England. And I would be like, oh, I'm working on this book about hot springs. And then sometimes I would watch people's faces and realize, oh, they don't know about a
Right.
hot spring, whereas I grew up with it. And so a hot spring typically is when the geological phenomena is which groundwater goes through often little fissures and cracks in the Earth's crust, hits a point in which magma or geothermal heat is a little closer to the surface than normal and forces that groundwater back up, this time with heat. So when it emerges and comes back up to the Earth's surface, it often brings a very specific little alchemy of minerals and different natural substances that can be therapeutic. And so, and everybody sort of claims different things. So I often allow people to sort of have their own interpretations of what the heat and the minerals do to their own bodies. So a hot tub is typically when like normal water could be from a hose, a well, whatever is heated artificially. So there's wood-fired hot tubs, there's hot tubs that are heated through all sorts of different electrical systems. Some of the hot baths in Japan are heated through natural gas. One of the hot tubs was heated by burning wood from the homes that had been torn down to make way for new homes. There's so many different stories just in how hot tubs are heated, to be honest. So
Next hot tubs.
yeah, yeah. Answered your question.
Oh my gosh, those were great questions. I see my mom and our friends Kristen and Richard Berger talking from across the country, remembering visiting Solduck Hot Springs and Olympic Hot Springs out in Washington State. I think, you know, it is kind of a special experience, especially for us New Englanders that don't get to, you know, see it on a natural basis. Of course, a lot of us are privy to quarries and special things like that. But I guess, do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite hot spring? Can you say one, or is that illegal?
I think it's illegal. I actually, I don't have a favorite because it's like, you know, Bergdorf I grew up going to forever. So that place comes with tons of memories for me. Some of them were just like completely otherworldly to go to. Like I just was like, how is this a real place on this planet? Some of them felt really connected. Like one of the hot spring locations in India was hot enough that a woman fainted from the heat. But before she even like hit the ground, people were like scooping cold water onto her body and holding her body up. So I saw this like amazing level of community care. Sometimes in Japan, women are scrubbing each other's backs. But that location in Budapest, Gellert, I did walk into and I cried. It was so beautiful. So I think that is possibly the location where I'm like, man, I really want to go back to experience that place.
Yeah, I couldn't believe that photo was real, to be honest.
It's super, super special.
Yeah, it's unreal. And Kathy, thank you for the great questions. Another one that I want to know, how hot do hot springs get? And
Ooh.
how do we measure that? Because I know different countries have different, you know, if you could translate it into Fahrenheit, but how hot do they go and how hot is safe enough, or is that different per person?
I mean, I don't know. That is such a good question. I think
I know.
I mean, because uh uh there are hot springs that are just not safe for humans to experience. Like think about a lot of the natural hot pots and pools in Yellowstone. They're not safe for the human body because of temperature and chemical composition. So to have hot springs that are safe for the human body, either they're coming out of the ground at the appropriate level, but most of the time there's someone there mixing it with cool and cold groundwater. So I went to hot springs that were lukewarm, that were like a little bit warm. Like the ones in Mexico, they're lukewarm. They're very, very pleasant, but they're not hot. But they're still considered a hot spring. I don't know if that's because of the level at which they're mixing them or if that's what came out of the earth, like it came out of the earth at that temperature. And then I went to some where I was like, yikes, this is really, really hot. Those are my favorite though. Like the ones that are really, really hot. I loved it. And I think those are usually like 104, 105 degrees, the ones that are like kind of send out some alarm signals in your body. Again, though, those are ones where I'm like, oh, what a delight. My favorite.
It's amazing. Leslie is saying that in Idaho, she remembers the users of a wild spring diverting the hot spring with stones into a cold spring to make it like the right temperature. So it's seeming like it can be man-made even in the natural world to cool it down.
Yeah, one of the ones actually in Idaho that I went to, I was like a waitress at a mountain lodge in the summers in college. One of the hot springs there, I would like go check it before my shift and kind of move stones around or move like pipes around and
You
then
did that
go.
yourself.
Yeah, and then I would go work my shift and then come back at night and hope that no one was there, had disturbed things it was just on the side of the road. So a lot of the hot springs, when I talk about the crossroad that hot springs are at, one of the crossroads is, I think, there have been like kind of quiet secret caretakers or little codes among each other. Like we scrub the tub out every year because it's just on the side of the road, or we move the stones around. And I think some of those caretakers, perhaps that generation is too old or they're passing away without passing down that knowledge. So some of the like informal codes on how to care for some of these places are also not necessarily surviving. That would maybe be a story for a second edition, but
I
yeah.
feel like that is kind of the story we're running into in a lot of things in our generation. I honestly can relate that to this festival of, I'm a volunteer, and Leslie, who you met, is a volunteer, and our moms who helped start this festival are, nearing their 80s. And so it's an interesting thing in how a lot of, these things that we treasure, we don't realize are generationally passed down. And it's especially important that you were one of the caretakers. I mean, that's another giant connection to your book that I didn't realize. Like that's so special.
Well, I think the thing is whenever we're at a hot spring, we're always the caretaker. Whether you're there for like an hour, you are part of the team that cares for that piece of land and that water. So if I could impart anything, like that's sort of the message, is like we're sort of caretakers of whatever space that we are present at. And that is especially true with hot springs.
That's amazing. We have another question from John Clark, who says, your images have a definite lovely look to them, almost painterly. Was this something you did intentionally? And if so, how did you accomplish this?
That is so nice.
I would
Um,
agree.
that is a really nice compliment. Thank you so much. I mean, yeah, I strive to make the prettiest pictures I can. I don't always do that. You know,
You
there's a lot
always shoot digital, or what's
to do. I wish that I could shoot film, but as soon as I started in photojournalism school, you start having deadline oriented projects where photos are due right away. And I have been photographing on deadline basically since I was in school,
yeah.
however many years ago. Um, I did go through a phase in which I was very, very obsessive about looking at paintings and figuring out paint light from different eras of paintings. And I feel that a lot of times, like when I first started in photography, I was looking at a lot of photographers' work, and now I really look at and admire other photographers, but I don't look at their work for direct inspiration for my own work. I'm more interested in looking at other mediums, including like how are comedians talking about finding their voice in comedy, because that can directly apply to finding my own voice as a photographer and knowing when it's my distinct voice versus copying someone else's. Similar with like figuring out light and paintings and applying it to photography, listening to athletes talking about training for future events. Like a lot of times in photography, I'm like, well, I don't really know how to work with this type of light, but I might have to do it for an assignment. So I'm going to sort of train myself now, so I'm prepared for when I've got to do something, to make my editors happy. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I like the idea of like being this big panel for like inspiration and trying to take it from all different sources, especially things that don't necessarily have a direct.
Amazing. We have a few more questions and I think like 5 to 6 more minutes. So let's see. Judy is asking us, how do you think about storytelling when you are photographing on a trip? Are you thinking about how the photo essay will come together? And are there certain moments of the trip you're trying to capture?
Yeah, I think when I'm traveling, you don't always know what you're going to expect. So I try to be pretty open um, to who I might meet, or who or where might contribute most to the story. And I also try to think about each, like the color and light palette of each space. So sometimes I'll photograph from a couple days or multiple days, however long I have in the budget to be there or on, before my deadline. So I will photograph the first day and then I start to like almost storyboard or mood board it out and figure out the light quality and the color tones in a space that feel like that space, like that felt to me what it was like to be there. And then as I go, I start to like reference earlier photos in my mind as like teammates. Um,
Mm.
so I often think of like photographing a place as stitching a quilt. So I'm looking for pieces that like can be stitched together to complement each other, different shapes that can mirror each other, or different
Which is the intro and the ending
Totally.
of your book. It literally is a quilt of all the photos, some of the photos you've taken.
And I felt like I was trained to be a hunter. So a lot of times in photojournalism, the idea is like you're trying to find one photo that tells everything. And in the end, I'm like, well, I kind of like stitching things together or imagining like I'm out like gathering different berries. And then in the end, I like figure out what things I put into my basket actually will make the go into the final recipe.
I love
So
that. I love that analogy. And I also think Kyle asked a question that is very similar to what you're answering now. Can you talk a bit about your editing process mainly? How did you select the subset of photos from the book with probably from the thousands of photos that you took?
I cannot remember how many photos I took, but it was a lot, like a lot, a lot. And I photograph a lot. Like I try not to have any judgment of myself like while I'm taking pictures so that I can be surprised later on. And that means like sometimes I just take photos where I'm like, these are probably bad. And then later I'll look and sometimes the photos that I thought were bad were actually the best ones.
Wow.
Um, and then I like sitting down. Well, this was special because normally when I submit an edit for a project, it's like the day of or the day after I photographed it. And I have very little perspective of what's great, like what works because I'm photographing for a newspaper and that my deadline is immediate.
Mhm.
But with this book, I was spending a lot of time with the photos over the course of like a few years. And by the time Lizzie and I sat down to do the book, I sort of knew that maybe these 6 to 10 photos were the best ones. And I got to see like, well, this photo from Bolivia like mirrors this photo from
Mhm.
Iceland. Which of these two are better? And to kind of eliminate it so that there's not too much repetition. Um, and then what I loved about working with Lizzie is that she was like, she didn't feel that there needed to be water in every photo, that there were some photos that like there's a picture in Bolivia of a sign that's been like cracked and crinkled from the heat. And that's like kind of a stranger image to include than like an expansive photo of a hot spring. But I wanted photos like that felt a little different. Um, and there's a lot of books now that are made from publishers that are licensing stock images from photographers all over the world. And so there's a
Yeah.
lot of personal touch on those edits. So when I wanted to make these edits, I wanted it to feel like, well, I'm a person that went to these places and looked around and looked for the photos that I didn't see. A lot of times, oh, also to answer that question, I think Judy asked, I sometimes if I knew I was going to a place that had a larger tourism footprint, I would look at the pictures that had been geotagged on Instagram and not take those pictures. Like I would just be like, okay, you can scroll through and you see that there's like dozens and dozens and dozens
Yeah.
of influencers that have gone to take this one
Yes.
shot. But I did totally do the influencer shot in Mexico of Grutas Tolantongo because it's like it's just
Yeah,
too,
that was incredible to see.
yeah.
Yeah.
That
Um,
picture, a similar picture is all over Instagram, but sometimes you just gotta lean into
You
it,
have to. Yeah. I think there's two more, and so two quick ones, and one of them is perfect to wrap up with. Sarah said she's a big fan of the new book. She's graduating this June with a degree in fine art photography from Savannah College of Art and Design. Yay. She's from Vermont and she loves the work you do. Her question is, what kind of gigs did you find outside of your editing work internship? Essentially, how did you get your foot in the door for freelance work?
I would email 3 editors every week. So, and just say, I made like a script, like, hi, I'm Greta. I'm a photojournalist based in Portland, Maine. I'm interested in photographing this, this, and this. Would you add me to your roster of photographers? And usually people are looking for photographers in different areas. Oh, and I would add like a link to my website.
Which had portfolio?
Yeah, which had my
Perfect.
portfolio. And usually when people are looking at your website, they want to know, can you photograph a story? Can you photograph in different locations? And can you photograph regular people? So like if they looked at like a bunch of like if it was like models or something, I don't know. So, and then whenever I feel stuck, even to this day, I self-assign personal projects. And I really, really feel like personal work and personal projects are like the one thing that will move your personal, like your interior perspective and satisfaction as a photographer. It will move that forward. But it will also communicate to editors or people that will hire you what you want to photograph, not what you're told to photograph, but what you care about most. And so I usually have like a couple personal projects going on that I'm working on just like unpaid on the side. Although I will say, now that I've been doing this a little longer, that personal work, I'm turning more and more into pitches. And I feel like the more work that I've done and the more that I've been able to demonstrate, the more likely you are to find a publishing home for it. So you sort of almost like have to practice and by self-assigning stuff. And you also just need to let people know where you are and what you want to do.
I love your advice. It's so succinct and, setting goals for yourself, right? Like submit your work, market yourself. And then Leslie is here, which means we have 1 more minute. So from the anonymous attendee asked, when the book was just about to come out, what were you hoping people took away from it?
Well, first, I felt really vulnerable. So I just hoped that people would receive it with warmth. And I mean that kind of with like the pun intended. Like I just wanted it to be received kindly and generously, and people so far have done that. And then I think when I did some climate change projects. And what I found through that project is that people will protect the things that they feel protect them. So
Mm,
um, maybe you will protect a political system or an economic system if you feel like that's the thing that is protecting you. Um, Through this book, I wanted to make this like kind and gentle reminder that the natural environment is our ultimate like that is a thing that protects us and takes good care of us. And the more that we can relax into that feeling of being held and protected by the natural world, the more likely it will become an instinct that we also care and protect for it in return.
amazing.
Hope that makes sense.
No, it's great. And Greta, thank you for joining us. And just for everyone to know, this recording will be saved and put on our Literary Festival YouTube. And remember to grab a copy at your local bookshop. And
Yay,
back to
thanks
you, Leslie.
everybody.
Thank you, Greta. Thank you, Molly. That was a great conversation. I love seeing the slides. That's one of the great things about the virtual format. I think it really gets you up and close and personal with the images. So thank you again. We have 3 more events. One starts in 4 minutes. And then we have that's with Tony Rybus and Lauren Gronstein to talk about testimony in World War II. So a little bit different, but we also have YA mystery panel and a conversation with Jamie Attenberg and Steve Almond later on as part of the John Updike's Ghost podcast. So lots more great stuff to come. Thank you both again. And I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care.